Everyone, this is Lindsay. You're watching Lynn's Got Adventure, and today we are adventuring through another Bible story just like we do every Friday. Actually, this time before we get into the Bible story, which I will tell you about in a minute, I'd like to tell you a little story about what just happened this morning, yesterday. This is very, very fresh. So this is my set of keys for literally everything. I work at 2 churches and at somebody's house and a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot of different really important keys on this key ring, cluster, whatever it is. And yesterday I was at work at one of the churches, had lunch out in a park and came back at the end of lunchtime, and then a little while later I realized that my keys were missing. I was like, oh dear, where did they go? Retrace all my steps. I barely had time to think about it at that point, so I had to wait for a few hours after I had a whole bunch of stuff happen. And then, was able to keep looking for it. But the longer I looked, the more I realized it was nowhere to be found. I went out to the car park a whole bunch. I went out to the park to check if it was on the grass, and it was gone. It wasn't anywhere in any of the buildings I'd been. And yeah, so I had some people checking with me, and it was just impossible to find these keys. And eventually, a couple of hours later, I had to make a decision about whether I got a locksmith to come to my car, but it was like after hours at that point, so it would be very expensive. And I was like, oh, do I go home, which was like 40 minutes drive away? And eventually I thought, well, actually I have some people who I haven't really hung out with for the last 6 months. We used to go to the same church, but now they go somewhere else. And I haven't really seen them much, and I didn't want to be that person who just calls when they need something. But eventually I did call one of the girls and I said, hey, are you able to come and get me? Because I can't drive my car. I have no keys. I don't know where they've gone. I've been looking high and low for them. And she was like, hey, thanks for calling. Like, great to hear from you. Like, she didn't have any issue at all about, me wanting help. And so she came to get me, and she was like, hey, how about you stay over? Because she lived on the same street, 1 kilometer away, basically. And so we went home, grabbed some stuff for me to sleep over, and I stayed there overnight. And then in the morning, I woke up, did my devotionals, and by 9 o'clock I was out the door. I didn't really know what my plan was, but I knew I wanted to walk back to the church, give the whole place one last look over in the park, in the car park, everywhere. And while I went, I called all these police stations that were in the local area, hoping that if it was left somewhere on the ground by accident, if I dropped it somewhere, that somebody nice would have picked it up and handed it into the police station, one of the many. And so I called a bunch last night, and then I called a bunch this morning as I did my 15-minute walk, probably less than that, honestly, 10-minute walk to the church where I was working. And so I called probably 4 or 5 different police stations this morning. And they were all like, sorry, we haven't had anything handed like that in. And this whole time, in previous times, I would have probably been really, really freaking out. I've been building this really bad habit recently of just leaving things where they shouldn't be. My phone, I've left at coffee shops in big shopping centers, or I've left it on the seat of the airplane as I was leaving. And I'm just getting this really bad habit in more recent times of just leaving 1 or 2 very, very important items behind. And thank the Lord that he's always managed to get to be returned to me. So, but this time, I've freaked out a whole bunch in the past. But this time I was really calm the whole time. I kind of wanted to freak out in a way, but at the same time, I just knew that God was in it somehow, and that he would make it all right. Even if I did have to replace all my keys and get my car rekeyed and all these kind of things, which I really would rather not have to go through all that. It was frustrating, and it was concerning, but I wasn't freaking out. I had peace over it all, and I was like, okay, God, you're in control. I wonder what you're gonna do through this mess that I'm in currently. And he made it work. He gave me this friend to let me stay over with her. And yeah, and then I was really close to the church, so I could go back there and figure things out. And when I got there, so I was calling all these police stations on the drive, on the walk there, and they all said, no, we don't have it. And as I was about to call like another one, and give up searching in the park where I'd ended up, I got this unknown caller. I was like, oh dear, okay. So I answered it. I was like, hello. And the guy said, we've got good news for you. I was like, oh, good. Which police station is this? So he told me, and he said, we think we've got your car keys. We described it to each other and decided, yep, those were my keys. I was like, yes. So I got the pastor who lives next door to the church. He came and drove me to get the keys from the station, and within 20 minutes of me leaving my friend's house, I got that phone call. I knew that I needed to start the day right, have breakfast, have a shower, have my devotionals, hang out with the cat at the house, all that kind of stuff, and just like be chill and not worry and just let God be in control. And then when the first part of the day of honoring God had been done, then I was able to go about the more stressful part of the day and try and figure out what to do next. And it all turned out fine in the end, and it was so great, and I was overjoyed, honestly, that it had all worked out. The police officer who gave me my keys said that some woman saw them in some car park. He didn't say when, if it was today or yesterday, and some magpies were swooping down on it. And I was just imagining like when God sent the ravens to feed Elijah. I was like, oh yeah, God sends birds to help people. I don't like birds. I like them to stay away from me in my head. I've been swooped plenty, thank you. But I know that God uses anything he wants to bring things to people's attention, to be, his hands and feet, and to make miracles happen. And I know this seems like such a small thing. It's like one set of keys, but it's attached to every part of my life, and it was a really huge thing for me. And God loves us so much that he goes out of our way to get things back to us. And I don't know if he intentionally took the keys away so I would have this little adventure. I enjoy adventures, especially when they turn out well. But yeah, that's just a little story from my life. I know it's got almost nothing to do with what we're about to discuss, but I thought you guys might enjoy hearing this little testimony of mine from today. So now we're going to talk about King Nebuchadnezzar. That is our Bible character for this week. Now, I've been reading this story, just reading through the book of Daniel, not knowing if I should talk about Daniel or Nebuchadnezzar or what I should talk about. But as I kept reading it over and over, I've just been feeling more drawn to Nebuchadnezzar's story. And alright, so let's have a quick chat about who he is. So King Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, which we know as a very big, powerful empire that was really glorious. Everything in Babylon was just covered in gold. Like, they were that wealthy, that well off as an empire that they just slapped gold onto everything. So this is a pretty fancy kind of nation, and Nebuchadnezzar's the guy in charge. And what I really want to get at in this chat we have today is how much God goes out of his way to get to us, to be in relationship with us. And so there are probably 4 different occasions throughout the first 4 chapters that we see God trying to get Nebuchadnezzar's attention. So the first way that I see this is just in the very first chapter. We see Daniel and his 3 friends are dealing with the food issue. They don't want to be eating all these unclean foods that they know is unhealthy for their body and will make them sluggish and kind of gross, and it's just against their own beliefs and their own purity laws and things like that. And they stand firm, and they manage to convince the guys in charge to let them continue to eat fruits, veggies, and just drink water instead of, be weighed down by all the alcohol and the heaviness of the meats and all these kind of things. And so by the end of their 3 years of university, basically, in the king's, he brought all these young men from around his empire who were high nobility in whatever part of the empire they were in, and he brought them together, trained them up in the ways of Babylon, like the religion, the politics, all the sciences, and, you know, all that kind of stuff, so he could have these well-trained young men who were from all these various provinces, that he could like have all of this really good cultural understanding of how to best deal with all his people from, you know, 127 different satraps we see later down. So he had 127 different little countries that he had brought together into this great big empire. And so he had to have people who knew how to deal in each of those little, you know, geopolitical regions. So he brought them up, and at the end of the first 3 years of these guys being in their university training, he tested them all. So there was these 4 guys, and then there was a bunch of other guys who came from either Israel and Judah or the other countries as well. And out of everyone, it was these 4 who had the most knowledge and the most wisdom, and they were considered 10 times wiser than anybody else in the entire university and probably the entire kingdom at this point. So the first way that we see God getting Nebuchadnezzar's attention is going, who are these guys, and how are they like literally 10 times better than anyone else that we can find? Like, they are more than excellent, you know? So he's got these good guys, and he puts them in positions of power and influence around him, because obviously you want the best when you're ruling an entire empire. So he puts them in high positions. And then after this, he gets his very first dream. So we know that God likes to speak to us through dreams and visions and various other ways, but dreams are a pretty big way. And kings and, you know, priests and stuff like that in all these different kingdoms back then, they really took notice of their dreams. You know, today we don't always take as much notice of our dreams. I know I've been dreaming my entire life, but a lot of them I'm like, is that a pizza dream or is that a dream from God? And sometimes they are dreams from God, but I think a lot of them are pizza dreams. And so sometimes I think the dreams from God are pizza dreams as well. So, but anyway, kings in ancient times would take a lot of notice of their dreams because they believed that that's how the gods communicated to them. And in this case, that was actually what was happening. God was communicating to him, just like God communicated with Pharaoh when Joseph interpreted that dream, and it's happened many other times as well. In this case, Nebuchadnezzar, well, he ends up having 2 dreams by the end of his story, but the first one, he has this dream of this enormous statue, and it's got a head of gold, you know, arms and chest of silver, you know, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. And then there's like this big rock that smashes it and it turns into a giant mountain. And it's like this big crazy dream, what's going on? And so he gets this dream and nobody can interpret it. So he's going to kill all the wise men, including Daniel and his friends. But Daniel's like, hold on, give us some time. Let's pray and ask God to help us. And so eventually Daniel is able to do the impossible because God gives him this vision of the exact same dream, because the thing was that Nebuchadnezzar couldn't even remember his dream. And so he's asking all these wise men to try and tell me my dream and the interpretation. And if you can tell me what I dreamt, then I know you'll be able to interpret it. I don't know if he was trying to play off that, you know, he was testing his wise men, or if it was pretty obvious that he was distressed and he just couldn't remember his dream, but he knew it was super important. Could go either way there. But obviously he was pretty upset, and he was at the point where he was going to just kill all the wise men if he didn't get an answer really quick. And then, yeah, by the end of this story, Daniel is able to tell him his dream and tell him the interpretation, tell him that the interpretation is true. And by the end of that, Daniel gets promoted, and he manages to get his 3 friends promoted as well. And they're like at the height of, you know, the government in Babylon at this point. They're over everything. But what I really want to focus on in this part is King Nebuchadnezzar's response to the interpretation, to the telling of the dream. So we look in Daniel chapter 2, verse 47, and it says, verse 46, Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face prostrate before Daniel and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. And then verse 47, the king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." And then, they get promoted. I just dropped something. So that's his first response. So he's like, okay, clearly Daniel's God is a really good God, and he wants me to know this, so he revealed it, and that's awesome. So he is the best God. He's the God of gods. All right, so that's his first response. The next thing that happens is we start to see how arrogant and prideful and narcissistic that Nebuchadnezzar has become. So obviously he's in charge of this most glorious, wonderful empire that has ever existed. Everything is covered in gold. And he looks out over this and he's like, you know what? I am that head of gold. Daniel told me I am that head of gold, and then there's going to be some other kingdoms that come after me. Screw the other kingdoms coming after me. This kingdom is going to live on forever. And you know what? I'm going to make this big gold statue that is gold from head to toe, and that will represent my kingdom being, eternal, basically. So he didn't like that last part where it says that the rock that was cut out without hands and turned into crushed the statue and turned into a mountain that filled the earth. He didn't like that part. He didn't like the part that was going to be the kingdom that went on forever and ever. Even though he originally said that, yes, this is a dream from God, he just ignored 90% of the entire dream and just went with the first part, which made him look good. All right? So that's where we see his arrogance and narcissism coming in. And it gets worse. He wants everyone to, all of his administrators from the 127 satraps across the provinces of Babylon. He gets them all together, all the high officials. We don't know what happens to Daniel at this point, actually. Daniel doesn't seem to be on the scene, but his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are there, and they have to make the really hard decision of following God and risking their lives to not bow down and worship this image, this idol. So they don't worship the idol. And because of King Nebuchadnezzar's very high view of himself, he's making everyone bow down, worship, while there's all this music playing, all these different instruments are playing, and if they don't, they're going to be thrown into the furnace. And so somebody comes and dibba-dobs on the three boys who are like, no, we're not going to do that. They don't bow down. And somebody goes and tells King Nebuchadnezzar, did you know that these boys, they are refusing to worship your idol that you've set up, your statue you've set up, an idol to yourself. And at this, King Nebuchadnezzar responds in rage and fury. At first, actually, he says, all right, bring the boys here. Clearly, they just didn't understand what was going on. We'll give them a second chance. So he explains it all to them again. And they're like, we don't have to explain ourselves to you. We are not going to do that. And if you throw us into the fire, then that's fine. Our God can save us. And if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. We've lived our lives. It's all right. So he gets even more enraged. Makes his servants make the fire 7 times hotter. He's like, let's make this extra, extra hot. Let's make it into a volcano. All right. And so he gets them to be thrown into this volcano of fire in his backyard. This great big fiery furnace. By the way, guys, I like volcanoes. So I'll throw a volcano into any story if I can. So he gets them thrown in, fully dressed, and says with their coats, trousers, turbans, and other garments, completely dressed as per usual. And he gets his strongest men to throw these guys into the fire. And, you should, I assume most people know this story, but the big, strong, muscly, security guards that he's getting to throw them in, they actually die immediately. They're just melting as they throw in these guys. But the guys are completely unharmed, and they start walking around just chilling, and Nebuchadnezzar's, furious and everything. And then he's looking, he's like, hold on guys, didn't we send 3 people into the fire? How come there's 4? And one of them looks like a son of a god. And so he's like a little bit scared, and he can obviously see that God is presenting himself to Nebuchadnezzar in this. And like the boys are getting to hang out with Jesus basically, and Nebuchadnezzar can see Jesus walking around. Like, he's not called Jesus at this point, it's just another theophany, another time when God, shows up in a tangible way. But I would assume that this is Jesus himself walking around. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, come on, get out of the fire, let's check you out, make sure you're okay. Like, he's freaked out at this point. He's gone from enraged tyrant to freaking out, oh dear, there's a god walking around in there with them. What is going on? And they're alive, and then they come out and the boys aren't singed, they're not hurt, their ropes or whatever they've been tied up with completely broke off in the flames, but they were able to walk around freely and hang out with Jesus at the same time. But yeah, they don't smell like smoke or anything, and like everyone, all the administrators are crowding around like, what is going on? This is crazy. And so at this, he responds with, in chapter 3, verse 28 to 30, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel, or a son of the gods, it says, it could be translated as, and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they get promoted just endlessly over and over and over. Which is wonderful. Side note, if you follow God, you're probably going to get promoted a few times. Anyway, that's not the point we're trying to make here. So in these 3 verses that we just read, we see Nebuchadnezzar saying, blessed be the God of these boys who sent the son of the God and delivered his servants who trusted in him. So he's, in the previous part, he said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets. And this time he has said that blessed be this same God who sent his own son and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And then later it says, if there's anyone who says anything against this God, their houses shall be made an ash heap and they shall be cut in pieces, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. So he's seeing God as a revealer of secrets, and then he's seeing God as a deliverer and somebody who brings salvation. So he's seeing all these different sides of God. And then he has his second dream. So this is point number 4. So he sees that these boys are crazy wise, and he doesn't really say much about that except like, what the heck, they're 10 times wiser and smarter than everyone else. That's interesting. Point number 2, he's got that first dream. Point number 3, he's got this golden statue issue with his pride and his arrogance, but then he sees that God is a deliverer even from himself, the most glorious, wonderful king who is a tyrant. And now we come to dream number 2 in chapter 4, Daniel chapter 4. So he has this dream of this giant tree, and it gets chopped down, and it's a beautiful, wonderful tree that everything's being looked after underneath it. All the animals and the birds and everything, but then it gets chopped down at the base. The stumps and the roots are left in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. This is verse 15. And then it says, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth, let his heart be changed from that of a man, let him be given the heart of a beast, let 7 times pass over him. And this decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. gives it to whomever he will, and sets it over the lowest of men. Okay, and this is the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had seen. Like he's writing this story in his own hands. And then he gets Daniel to interpret it, because nobody else can do it, but you are able, for the spirit of the holy God is in you. And then Daniel explains the dream, and he's like, this tree is you. And I really, really wish that this tree was somebody else, like one of your enemies, because this is not a good dream. And at the end, in verse 27, we see that it's actually a warning dream, because he says, therefore, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. So he's saying, this doesn't necessarily need to happen. You and your wonderful, glorious kingdom that covers the earth doesn't need to be cut down in the way that it could be because of your arrogance, because of the way that you're behaving. If you live righteously, if you look after the poor, if you have mercy, if you put away your sins and you live for God, then maybe you don't actually have to be humbled in the way that you're about to be. So yeah, that's just another point about dreams. Sometimes dreams are definitely going to come true, and sometimes they're a warning of what might come true, and if we don't change our ways, then they will come true. And I've had a few of those. I've had some very humbling moments that I actually did have warning dreams about, multiple of them, and I didn't get it, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't really try hard to figure it out, and was very, very humbled. So let's have a look at how that turned out for King Nebuchadnezzar. So all of this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. This is chapter 4, verse 28. At the end of the 12 months, he was walking about the royal palace of Babylon. The king spoke, saying, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling, for my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? And so he's talking about, like, look at this wonderful kingdom that I've made all by myself, not recognizing God's goodness in this at all, not recognizing any kind of humility. He's just like puffing himself up even more than he has before, in his arrogance, in his pride, in his self-importance. And it says in verse 31, while the word was still in the king's mouth, so he's in the middle of saying this sentence, a voice fell from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he chooses. That very hour the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. So as he's saying, look how wonderful I am, God drops his word out of heaven. Everyone around him can hear, because he's obviously not talking to himself. He's got people around him. As a king, you're just never alone. And he's always got some kind of courtiers and soldiers, bodyguards, everyone around him and all that kind of stuff. And so as he's talking and telling everyone how amazing he is, God's like, hold on. Do you remember that thing I said a year ago? I'm going to repeat it. The kingdom is now ripped away from you, and for the next 7 years, you're going to be basically an animal. Enjoy. And it says, in that very hour, it was fulfilled, and he was driven away, and he started eating grass like an ox. So I actually studied this in one of my counseling classes a few years ago, and I was really interested in what the heck was going on with Nebuchadnezzar. We were looking at like different Bible characters and trying to figure out how to diagnose them, basically. A lot of people diagnose people with depression in the Bible. Fair enough. But I was like, Nebuchadnezzar's crazy. What is going on? So I did my research. It's probably like 3 or 4 years ago, and found out about this condition called Lycomania. And Lycomania comes from lyco, that word means wolf. And mania, I guess, means crazy. So, I don't know, that's probably a really bad interpretation. But anyway, basically there's this condition where people believe that they are any variety of animals. Like there's a whole bunch of people in India who believe that they are snakes. and they just act like snakes. A lot of people in Europe, I mean, this isn't like a lot, like hundreds and thousands or whatever, but like there are very distinct individuals in very distinct regions that typically tend to gravitate towards believing that they're a typical type of animal. So a lot of people in North America and in Europe, if they're going to feel like they're going to be like an animal, they're going to think they're a wolf. People in India tend to think that they're a snake. And there's like all these other animals that some people, like there's all these crazy case studies of people believing that they're any different random type of animal. Some of them include cows, and there's legit been people in the last 50 years or whenever who just live at the psych ward and sit outside in the grass and munch on the grass, and that's their entire diet. So they're like legit the same kind of guy as Nebuchadnezzar. So if we were going to call Nebuchadnezzar crazy in any kind of official sense, we'd probably call him somebody who has Lycomania. Don't know if that's very important, but it's a way of seeing it from a modern perspective. Yeah, so he goes crazy. He is driven away from human society and he just becomes this animal. He doesn't wash himself. He doesn't sleep inside in shelter. It says he is covered with the dew for 7 times, but basically that means 7 years. I don't know if there's too much debate around that, but basically I would go with 7 years. Yeah, and this whole time I'm really curious about like how he managed to become the king again after 7 years of being crazy and off the scene and like, you know, eating the grass and his nails getting super long. Can you imagine? Like your nail beds grow out every 6 months. So for this much nail, that's 6 months there. So if we give that times 14, it's probably going to be like that long. Like his nails are getting like this long in about seven years. I don't know, something like this. You know, big crazy nails. It's really gross. And they'd be all manky and filled with dirt and like broken and split all the way up, and it's just disgusting. And then his hair is getting all matted, like he hasn't seen a hairbrush for 7 years, and like just getting all dreadlocked and full of twigs, and it's probably got cockroaches living up there. And yeah, so that's what this guy looks like. He's just this big scary guy with long claws and his hair turned into a big matted mess. And just, yeah, he's got grass in between his teeth. Yeah, it's just gone weird. And so this was the most glorious, wonderful, powerful man in the whole world, and now he is not even a man anymore. His mind is completely gone. But the dream and the interpretation given was that it would only happen for 7 years, and then after that, you know, it would be over. And so it says at the end of the time, so in verse 34, chapter 4, verse 34, at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand, or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles resorted to me, so they came back to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. So even more excellence and majesty than he had before was added to him after this time. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth, and his ways justice. And those who walk in pride he is able to put down. The end. No. So basically, it has a pretty happy ending. After all of the different ways that God's trying to get his attention, he eventually has to completely strip Nebuchadnezzar of literally everything, even his sanity, to get rid of his pride that is standing in the way of him recognizing and being in relationship with God. So God loves him so, so much that he sent him, what did I write? He spent so many years, he sent 2 dreams, Jesus himself, signs and miracles, and placed God-fearing men of wisdom around Nebuchadnezzar to get his attention. He wouldn't do that if he didn't love him. It's pretty simple. So I love that at the end of chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar is praising and saying, I worship you, God, like, you're God, and I'm not gonna, turn away from you, basically. Like, you've stripped me of my pride, and I am very much humbled, and I'm very much loving and following you now. So yeah, it's a happy ending. I like it. Yeah. God loves each of us just as much as he loved Nebuchadnezzar. He sent Jesus to die for us on the cross to give us salvation. We see him as our deliverer. We see him as a revealer of secrets for us. We see him as someone, I certainly see him as somebody who gets rid of our pride and completely strips us. Like, I have been through so many experiences, like, I think 2017, I think I've probably told this story a few times now. We seem to talk about pride a whole bunch on this channel, where God started telling me in the start of 2017, humility. And I was like, okay, God, I think I hear you're trying to tell me something. Because I have a lot of people around me who raised me who are prideful, and it rubbed off on me really well. And I've been quite prideful my whole life. So really needed to be unlearned. And what's this, 4 years later, nearly 3.5 years later, I'm still unlearning it. Earlier this year, God reminded me to humble myself, and he certainly took me through some very humbling experiences that, like I said, I had dreams that were warning dreams, and I didn't pay enough attention to them and became very humbled in the process. But just like Nebuchadnezzar, who God said this would happen for 7 times, 7 years, and then he'd be restored, if he made the right decision. For me, even, I spent the last 6 weeks in a very humbling situation in a particular area of my life. And, that thing is being restored to me now, I think. I'm pretty sure. It's looking pretty good. So yeah, like, it doesn't last forever. When we go through the process with God, when we allow him to humble us, when we allow him to reach out to us in whatever way is necessary, it doesn't, like, the pain doesn't last forever. And at the end of it, we are given more honor and majesty and glory than we had before, because we are in his presence and we are in love with him. Anyway, that's my story. Yeah, so I don't know. You can figure out what you want to do with this information. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you. If you do have something you'd like to say, comment, like, subscribe, share with a friend, all of that. And I will see you again next Friday. Okay, bye.